Hi, I'm Mike. Welcome back to the shop. In this episode, we get these bad boys working. Yeah. So here's a side-by-side comparison of a restored and upgraded taillight on the right and the original taillight on the left. I will also turn on the left blinker, left turn signal, to show you what that looks like in comparison to the right turn signal. So that's how the left turn signal is working. It doesn't even work. So this is one of the reasons why I'm upgrading the taillights and the electrical system. This is one of the primary safety things that I'm trying to achieve, is having good enough bright lights on the back of the Spitfire so that bigger vehicles can see it and stop in time. So this is the materials and tools that you're going to need to do this job. I've got some sheet cork gasket material that I'm going to use to make a new gasket. You can see this one is destroyed. This will be a gasket between the lenses and the taillight housing. So I'll use this old destroyed one as a template, and I'll show you how I'm doing that. You'll need a set of wire strippers. I really like these vice grip wire strippers. They work really well. You're going to need an X-Acto knife to cut the pattern out for the taillight, the lens gasket. You're going to need 3 LED taillights, one for the brake and taillight running light, one for the turn signal, and one for the backup light. The only difference between the turn signal and backup light is that they have a single connection, so only one wire going to them. And the brake light and running light have 2 different connections, one for the brake wire and one for the running light wire. I will put the part numbers for these LEDs that I've sourced off of Amazon so that you can find them. You'll need 18 gauge wire that'll be used for running individual grounds to each of the 3 taillights. The grounding system in the base, or the original Triumph Spitfire, worked well out of the factory, maybe, but after being 40 years old, or 40 years of use, just not cutting the mustard anymore. Finally, to restore the existing taillight lenses, we'll just use a polishing compound and a fine fiber polishing pad, and that will clean up or bring back the luster of the outside of the taillights. To get the old taillight off the car, you need to unscrew. There's five nuts that go through, or 5 studs and nuts that go through the back panel of the car. So there's 5 of them take off. You can see the back of the housing is pretty dirty. A lot of this is rubber material from the original gasket. I'm actually going to replace the taillight housing to bodywork gasket with a new gasket. Source this off of British Parts Northwest. I think you can get it off of other sites too, but this is a nice gasket that actually goes around the back of the taillight housing here, so it gives it a little bit more of a finished look than the original gasket that was on here. So it gives it a nice look. I'll show you on the back of the car here how that. This is the restored one. You can see how that gasket comes out and the taillight housing actually sits inside of that. That's not the way it was when I took off the existing housing. So to take the taillight housings out, I'll show you that in a second here. To remove the individual lights, it's relatively simple. Let me get this gasket out of the way here. These are press fit, and all you have to do is rock them, pull and rock, and they will come up. They will come off. and they're held in place by these spades, basically, that hold it in place. This is also part of the original grounding system that we're going to enhance when we use our separate grounding wires that I'll show you how I installed. So there's one. There's the running light and brake light, and you can see there's two different connections for wiring on that one versus the single wire in the back here. And then the turn signal. So that just comes right off. This is actually a new one that I sourced also from British Parts Northwest. These are relatively inexpensive, so it's a good way to go. Once we get them upgraded, they'll work really well and they'll work as intended. To get the taillight lenses off, you have to unscrew screws on the back of the taillight housing. There are two for the backup light. There are two for the brake and running light, and then there are three for the turn signal. Okay, so all three lenses are off, and you can see the interior gasket on this one is also pretty well shot. The lights on this car really run hot, and it's amazing to see the difference in temperature. If you have to actually feel it, put the lights on for a little while, and it's enough to melt the rubber. So if you or once you change over to LEDs, you'll be amazed at how cool running they are. So what I'm going to do is take this out and I'm going to save it because I need to use it as a template or a partial template, and I'll make the new gasket up from that. The other thing that I forgot to show, let me go grab that. The other thing I forgot to show were the spray paints that I'm going to use to restore. So here's the gasket material. I'm going to spray paint the cork sheet with just a flat black. The other thing that needs to happen is these taillight housing reflectors have lost their luster, and for these to work really well, I'm also going to use a bright coat. It's basically an aluminum or a chrome coating, and on the first taillight that I restored, that worked really well, and it's providing a great way of providing that reflection of the LED lights. So I think that's part of the benefit here of the restoration. So to clean this taillight housing, the dirt on this side is not too bad. That can clean up with just regular cleaners. But on the flip side, there's lots of gunk from the original gasket material that it's just simply melted in. What I'm going to use, and some people might frown upon it, but what I found works well, is to use just gasoline and a gas-soaked rag. What I'm going to do is use that gasoline, and when it's done, I'm going to basically pour the used gasoline back into my gas container, and I'm just going to run it in my lawnmower. It's not a big deal. So the lawnmower doesn't seem to mind about that. So I'm going to wash that up there. I'm going to stick all of the lenses into, clean off the back, but I'm going to stick them in temporarily for a couple hours into the white vinegar and basically soak off some of the junk that's on here. So I'll go through that process and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. Okay, for one of the taillight sockets, what I've done is pulled the rubber cover off the back, and you can see this is the connection for the bottom of the taillight, and that will connect directly to that point on the taillight. Don't know the technical term right now. I'm at a loss of words, sorry. What I'm going to do is take a 18 gauge wire, and this is this point here, it's hard to see, but this is the connection for the ground, and that connects into all of these spades, and then the spades connect to the housing, and then the housing has on the back a grounding point here, and then the ground goes to the frame of the car or the body of the car. So there's a lot of different connections that need to be made to make that ground work. Any one of them doesn't fit or work, you got a tail light out, and that happens a lot. So what I'm going to do is take this 18 gauge wire, and I'm going to run it up through, there's a slot in the side here of, and let me screw, there's a slot in the side here that, now you can see it without my finger in the way, that I'll be able to run the wire up through. So if you look at the back of the taillight housing, there is, or the taillight socket, there's a groove that goes in there, and I'm going to stick the wire into that hole and bend it down. So let me do that. So get focus here. So now the wire goes down that groove, I bend it through, and then when I stick the LED light into it, the body of the light is where the ground is. That 18 gauge wire is going to come into really hard, intimate contact with the tail light housing, and that's going to provide the ground. Now what I'll do is then take the other end of that 18 gauge wire. What I'm going to do is take the other end of that 18 gauge wire and ground it directly to the body. So I've eliminated at least one connection, maybe two, in the overall process here, and you get a great ground. And so each one of these housings is going to be set up that way. So when I put it in, let me see, where's everything line up? I stick this in, and you'll see it's really hard to get in because it's almost an interference fit, and then just turn it. So now I've got a wire. If I pull on it, it's not bad. And then what I'll take is some of this friction tape and just wrap it around to hold the wire into that channel, and then I'm going to slip this rubber cover back on. Oh, by the way, I need to put a little bit of a hole that lines up directly with that cover. So I'll poke a hole in that with the X-Acto knife, and then I'll run the wire out the back of that rubber cover. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I just repeat that 2 more times, and I've got sockets that are ready to be installed and the ground wire to be cut to length and grounded right directly to the body. So here's the layout of the gasket that goes between the lens and the taillight housing. I used the original, missing some pieces, just flipping and flopping and sketching it in. You're not going to see this anyways. It's on, again, behind the lenses, and so all I do is I cut it out, and then I'll make sure it fits into the housing and trim and trim and trim, and then I'll spray paint it flat black. see how it fits. Here's the cleaned up housing. I think the bolts are a little bit tight. The bolt holes are a little bit tight here. I gotta open these circles up. Okay, these 4 bolt holes need to be a little bit larger. Looks like everything else fits though, so I'm okay with that. Yep, that works. Now, all I need to do is spray paint it flat black. Those blue lines are going to be covered up, so it's not a big deal. Okay, the masking job for the deflectors. Don't need a whole lot of more prep than that. It's just going to be inside the cones here. Here's what the taillight housing looks like after 2 coats of paint with chrome paint. I did 1 light coat and then waited an hour and put a second coat on and let both coats dry for 24 hours. That looks pretty good. That'll help shine the lights. The other thing I did was polished the, actually cleaned and polished the lenses. Soaked the lenses in white vinegar. I probably could have just done water, but had the white vinegar. And then wiped it off and then polished it with the polishing compound. And here's the cork gasket. Nice, couple nice coats of flat black, and that'll fit nicely. So let's start assembling all this and get it mounted on the tail. Okay, first thing we do is mount the LED lights with the sockets and the newly installed ground cables. And we just go one by one here. Let's see, make sure I get the holes all lined up. Okay, so those are in. Now, we'll install the gasket. And then the tail light housing. So we'll start with the backup light first. So that fits in very nicely. And then I put the screws in. And make sure that the outside of the gasket fits around the housing. That'll help seal water out and dirt. Okay, good. Now it's ready to put onto the tail of the car. When installing the tail light, it's best to start the screw on the turn signal side first, because the taillight's curved, and for that gasket to stay over the top of the taillight housing, it actually wants to pop off. So I suggest you start with the screw in the corner first, get that tightened in, and then everything else will follow along, or can be adjusted by hand or pulled into place. So that one first. Okay, now that I got it bolted in place in the corner, I'll put the other four bolts in. This needs to be tightened up with a 3/8 inch wrench. Okay, so I've got all the wires here draped off the back out of the trunk, and I'm going to be working them one by one. It's a lot easier to manage if you keep your wires a little bit separate. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to work from the inside out. The green wire with the brown stripe is the backup lamp, and that's the outermost, so I'll plug that one in. There's a grounding tab on the housing, and there is I've got a ground wire for that, so I'm going to ground that housing. And then I've got the 3 new ground wires that are running directly to the sockets and the bulb, actually right directly to the bulb. I'm going to I'm going to tie these 3 off, and the backup light, which goes in right about here, what I'm going to do is take some steel wool and rub on the body work right near the backup light, which is right about here. I'm going to do that on the bottom one, and basically make a nice connection for that that ground on the inside of the body. Good. So what I'll do is take this 10 gauge connector. I'm going to make these the right size so that they'll run there. I'll cut them off, strip them, and then twist them together, and then crimp them in this 10 gauge. So the 3/18 wires twisted together into a 10 gauge connector. Shrink wrap. Now it's got to fit over the 10 gauge here, so I'm actually going to do this in 2 steps. One that'll go over the 3 wires, and then one that'll go over the 10 gauge as well. Yeah, it's a butane lighter. It works. Don't judge me. Okay, so now that this is cut, I'm going to put that, and I've installed the license plate lamp. Stick that on there, screw it on, and we got a nice ground. A nice direct ground, right to the bulbs. Again, 3/8 inch wrench. Tighten those up. I'll do those later. I just want to get this in. Okay. So, time to test. Ah, there we go. So now the left tail light is just as bright as the right. Again, all 3 LEDs on the brake light, the reverse light, and the turn signal. So the turn signal, which is the amber light, got a little bit of work to do. It's not flashing. I'm not sure why. It's an LED. I put an LED flasher in and it wouldn't light at all, so I put the original flasher in and it's not hyper flashing. So I got a little bit of work to do to figure that one out. I'll put that into another episode. But at this point in time, I've got some really nice connections here. They're working. It looks a lot better. So I'm really happy with the progress. So I hope you liked this episode. If you like what you see, please subscribe and go Bolts!